everyone. I'm sitting on a Greek island, which is amazing. And I actually walked by a statue of a Greek man who maybe one of you guys can tell me the name. I was just trying to look for it. I'm blanking on it. But one of the creators of the internet was a Greek guy who came from this island. Does that ring a bell, either of you? I'll find it when we're chatting. I should have dug it out before, but at any rate, I'm on a retreat with two other Capital Institute course alums and having an amazing trip here. We're focused on thinking about place and we'll save that story for another day. But mostly, welcome Jessica and Danielle. Great to have you back with us here, and really excited to have this conversation. I guess maybe I would love to just invite each of you to say hello and tell us, why you've decided to embark on this project before we get into what it is.
Great. Thanks, John. And thanks, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. It's so wonderful to see your faces today, familiar faces, loved faces, and also faces I don't know. So thanks for joining this space. Yeah, it's been a long journey. For me, in many ways, started a long time ago. I have a background in anthropology, but when I moved out to California about 20 years ago, the only anthro work I could really find was ethnography in tech companies. So within about a year, I went from studying ancient stone tools in paleoarchaeology to studying emerging digital technologies. And that set me on a course to studying all kinds of different tech, starting off with really exciting stuff like enterprise resource planning and accounting systems. But over the years, bouncing around from all sorts of different tech, from, the Internet of Things, blockchain, artificial intelligence, robotics, wearables, 5G, plus. And it was when I was studying the digital economy that I began really looking at the parallels of the digital economy as we understand it and have it today, and our physical economy, both of which have become very extractive. We extract from natural resources in the physical economy, we extract from behavioral resources in the digital economy. And right on down the list, from how we use our tech and algorithms to accelerate consumption, to putting more and more stuff, including e-waste, into landfills, to the power dynamics, and so on. This is what led me to the Regenerative Economics course, where I was in search of other economic models, and then asking the question, how might we apply our technologies to alternative economic models? So yeah, as part of the inaugural first cohort, we found our way. I had a thought that everyone in this course is going to be from tech. I was completely wrong, but that has really shifted my study and my career as a technology analyst. Really focusing on, okay, tech is interesting, and we are creating all kinds of new innovations and capabilities. But what are they actually in service of? How are we using them? How are these applications coming into the world? And I began asking this question, all right, so I understand that regenerative design is a new or old paradigm of design, but it's starting to crop up in, okay, regenerative agriculture and tourism and architecture and finance. Well, what about regenerative technology? Why is this not a thing in tech? For an industry that fancies itself as early adopters, where is this? And so, yeah, I live in Silicon Valley and began really on this inquiry about 5 years ago, around the time of the cohort. And we are now kind of emerging and bringing this into the world. So I'll pause there.
Save that story.
Yeah.
Danielle, share us with your story, your kind of background tech story and how you got to this project.
Yeah, I'm coming from a completely different background and world, very unlikely technologist, begrudgingly so, to be honest with you. I've been working or involved in the sustainability and community development space since I'm a little kid. My mom and I crowdsourced and funded our first ever project when I was 6, that was creating a community playground out of recycled tires. So back then, mutual aid and crowdfunding wasn't really a thing. We didn't even intentionally make it environmentally friendly. It was literally just what the most cost-effective and available resources were. I ultimately got into the whole interconnectedness of all things because I'm an avid reader and spoken word artist. And I kind of radicalized myself in my early days growing up in New Jersey, surrounded by highways, and just realizing this is not the natural order of things. So when it came to wanting to go to college, I was already way into beat poetry and Buddhism and Eastern philosophy, and starting to dabble in this weird thing called ecology. So I ended up at the Evergreen State College, and that was kind of the turning point for me, because a lot of the things that I was introduced to back then, I didn't know were kind of so radical. They were just what we were doing. We were one of the only towns in the whole country that had a local alternative economy. It was called the Sound Dollar. So I was introduced to Solidarity, E.F. Schumacher, exactly. I was introduced to solidarity economies and mutual aid as a teenager. My first friend at college created the first ever campus-wide composting program. Now it's pretty commonplace, but back then it was kind of like, wow. And I got to intern at NOAA as a teenager, which was super unusual. But that was where I encountered one of the lead scientists who was hired by Exxon through NOAA to evaluate the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And after 8 years, he returned to NOAA. And we had a really intense heart-to-heart where he broke down about the fact that his 8 years of research were being used by the corporation to validate the shareholders' decision not to pay for the cleanup. And that was the beginning of my diehard journey into sustainability. I have been focused on startups because I just love the energy that I see adults possess when they have a dream and an idea. Suddenly they turn into a child. And I notice that as we get older, we lose that sense of awe and that joy and that love. And I just wanted to remain there. And so I taught myself how to code and how to do all the digital stuff so that I could launch startups. And then my own startup, which at the time was called Green Breakfast Club, had to back burner because I had some medical issues. I got into a motorcycle accident and had a bunch of surgeries, and it took a different turn in my life that I didn't expect. And I suddenly launched a tech firm, and everything was fine until I discovered that it wasn't so fine. I wasn't happy. Tech was kind of crushing my soul. And I was fortunate to find out about the regenerative economics course. I jumped on it, met Jessica, and I see a bunch of really awesome familiar faces. And that was the thing that was so cool. And I just want to give Capital Institute and John a big hat tip, because 25 years ago, we were all unshaven and barefoot and crusty and granola, and it was awesome. But we didn't have people like you all involved in this kind of work. And I think it's just such a testament to the community that you've built, John, and the critical moment we're in, which is that we all need to be a part of this next phase of environmental stewardship. And economics is going to play a huge role in that. I was quite skeptical when I found out about Jessica's work. I hopped on a call with her, not to ally, but to give her shit, because I thought it was a bunch of bull. And that was how we started. So as the seed is, so the fruit shall be. I like to say that we're kind of like brave composters of this crazy world where there's a lot of crap out there, and we're going to need to compost it and cultivate the soil for whatever this next phase of the environmental action journey is. And I'll leave us with this, which is we may not have a fully fleshed out regenerative technology space yet, or a regenerative economics space yet. But can we possibly have a natural capitalism without it? I don't think so. So somehow we are going to co-create this, and I genuinely hope that we do it together, whatever that looks like.
So it's interesting. We have two conventional MIT engineers, one basically a tree hugger background and one a anthropologist. I'm being facetious about the MIT engineers, but it's interesting to me that you both come from an unconventional tech background to explore an unconventional idea, and I do think just just naming something regenerative technology alone is a great sort of conversation starter and provocation. Certainly could be, we could roll our eyes at it, but I agree, and I'm really excited that you've launched this project because ultimately I think the way we handle technology will probably determine the outcome of a lot of things we all care about. And so maybe just as a place to get grounded, I mean, we need to first start by, Jessica, you mentioned that, you were studying tools and you inferred that a tool is technology. So what do we mean by technology?
Yeah, this is, I think, a crucial starting point. I'll offer sort of two minds on this because there's, I think, an integrated view. And then if you go around on the street and you ask people what is technology, you might get a different answer. When I first began asking this question around regenerative tech, a longtime permaculturalist and mentor, Alan Booker, came to me and he said, look, we can't be talking about technology if all we're going to do is create another separatist definition. And so what we propose is a definition of technology that is part of everything else. So the way I think about a long view of technology that involves not just our species, but even others, is the structuring of the flows of materials, energy, and information to adapt. The structuring of the flows of materials, energy, and information to adapt. And in this way, beavers have technology. In this way, language is a technology. In this way, all sorts of things are tools that we used to adapt and hopefully to help ourselves thrive. This is, I think,
talk about the word adapt. That's interesting. Why to adapt rather than,
When was the last time you did that? It's usually, parts and,
if anyone's got their something going on, please
And
mute
rings
your
and take
phone if you've got another conversation going on. So
what taking the teeth out for, and her hearing's much
someone
worse.
needs to mute their phone, please.
Hey, Janice.
Janice.
we have some
Thank you. So the most provocative piece about that is the assumption that we're going to adapt. And of course, adaptation is part of a living system, but it isn't necessarily what most technologists think about when they wake up in the morning. So talk more about that if you can for a second.
Well, I think adaptation is how we experiment. It's how we improvise. It's how we change based on our environment. And again, that's not something unique to humans. The survival feature may be in some ways unique to humans insofar as we don't have big teeth. We're not very fast or strong, but we know how to use technologies. And this is deeply interwoven with our entire story and evolution. So we use tech to help ourselves adjust to the environment and to help ourselves adjust with each other. And obviously that can go both ways. But I think, this definition is a really important starting point because part of that other piece, when I said, I sort of have two minds of this. When you go around on the street and you ask people, what is tech? Most people will say, oh, like my smartphone or like a computer. They'll say digital technologies, and most business leaders and governments and investors are thinking digital technologies. Occasionally, you'll get the industrial or mechanical engineer who will expand that definition a little bit more. But by and large, these days, amidst the information age, big tech, digital technologies are the predominant kind of form that people think of. But I think we have to be able to hold all of them, particularly as we're looking at another chapter or maybe an evolution or dare I say maturation of the tech industry that is not only about the digital, but is also bringing in other forms of technology.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel, when Jessica gave you that definition, did your BS meter soften a little, or does that make sense to you, obviously?
Well-ish. We were recently back in New York at a conference that Jude Caravan was holding, and one of the facilitators had brought up that plant-based medicine was considered a technology. And I questioned that because I had actually not heard that framing before. And what it exposed was something that I didn't really know or understand about how even these definitions are evolving. So there's always something to learn. I think that when we look at regenerative technology, we certainly don't want to boil the ocean, but I think it's important to give space for nuance. And also to adapt our own opinions and understandings. We're all, creatures of the universe who are part of this ecosystem, which means that our own learning needs to adapt over time as well. So I wasn't aware that people looked at it that way, and frankly that the concept of technology could expand to something beyond just, like Jessica referenced, our smartphone or data infrastructure. And I will say, I think this is part of why the research and the background that Jessica has established with this foundation is quite unique, because it's not rigid and it doesn't require of her to get all the credit, which is unique in and of itself.
And I'll check in there for the.
And I'll leave it there.
We got another person that needs to mute their phone, please. So I just looked up the root of the word technology, and fitting that it's a Greek root. The word tech, can't read without my glasses. Techne means art and craft.
That's right.
So there's something creative about technology, which goes with the adaptation. So we have a rough idea of what we mean by technology, which I think Jessica, you're acknowledging there's two definitions: the man on the street and what you're talking about. But what we're talking about in this conversation is the broader concept of technology, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And so if that's what technology is, and say it again, because it's important.
The structuring of the flows of materials, energy, and information to adapt and maybe thrive.
And so what is regenerative technology?
Regenerative technology, I think in shorthand, is technology that is in service to life, technology that is in support of health in living systems, relationships that ensure fairness, and I think about care. How can technology support care for the community and for the earth?
I just want to give credit. We pulled that definition from Vandana Shiva's work. I've read every one of her books going back decades, and I'm just beyond impressed by her earth stewardship. And she had framed that around regenerative agriculture. And regenerative agriculture seems to be a concept that is a lot more mainstream than regenerative technology that frankly most people have not heard of when we use that phrase. And I just thought, let's not steal that, but let's honor that thought, that thinking, and apply it in a new space.
Yeah, and I think we could say that agriculture is a technology.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think too, just to sort of pile on, we don't have the full definition yet. This is something that is emerging. In fact, there are lots of examples out there already, but at the same time, part of this inquiry is looking at it from as kind of feeling into different parts of the elephant. Approach that we took on our website and in this white paper that we've written is, sort of looking at it through the lens of regenerative principles, technology that is designed with regenerative principles. Also a remembering of tech. How do we think about this broader definition of tech and understand this coevolution that we've had with technologies and what that means, what that implies for how we design and what it is that we're putting into the world from a looking into the future standpoint. Also, I think about, so much of the work that I've done in the last 20 years has been around quote unquote digital transformation. And again, that question there is, what has digital transformation been in service to? It has largely been in service to current paradigm, even obsolete playbook, right? Obsolete paradigm. It is largely
finance algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. Efficiency, revenue gains. And so what might the consultants in digital transformation love their frameworks, but what might a maturation of digital transformation actually look like? I think there's a bridge quality to this as well. And, you know, there's an innovation, maybe familiar with sort of the Horizon 1, 2, 3. How do we think about technologies as an enabler, as a catalyst into Horizon 3, right? So many definitions I want to throw out, and probably we don't know yet exactly.
So I have a couple of thoughts that came up, but before I share them, just for all of us, let us hear the technology and service to life. That part absolutely resonates, but share the longer piece one more time.
Technologies in service to living systems and health. Technologies in service to relationships that ensure fairness, reciprocity, and overall care for the community and for the earth.
The thought that came up for me from the short definition, and obviously that's all beautiful. Well, not obviously, that is all beautiful. And it does have a Vandana Shiva flavor to it. The piece, if I were to say what's missing for me is this, and it gets to the adaptive piece and the new definition I just read of technology, the creative piece, the craft and the art, is that there's something magical about unlocking potential that we don't know in advance. And I love the example of the internet. You know, no one designed the internet to do what we use the internet for, both good and bad. They essentially, and I don't really know the story, but they intuited that all kinds of good things would happen if we connected all these people and data and ideas and information together. And that's what's happened. Again, both for good and bad. And so somewhere in the definition of regenerative technology for me needs to be this idea that this facilitates the alignment with how life works for the sole purpose of unlocking previously unseen potential. And I don't know how to put that in your definition. That's not my point, but it's the key idea for me of why this is so profoundly important at this moment in time, as opposed to just another idea to roll off the shelf and write a book about, because that's what we need to learn how to do.
I mean, I think that's brilliant. And it speaks also to a mindset that exists in tech that arguably has not existed in the way that it needs to in the sustainability world. In other words, so much of that work in the ESG movement is risk mitigation, is doing less, is right. It is not about potential. It is about
exactly. It's all about exactly what we know and managing it.
And there is, as Danielle was getting at, that spark, that thing that happens for an entrepreneur, often in tech, of this is now possible. I could make this happen. And that is a completely different energy. And so how might tech really enable that through a regenerative paradigm?
It's the artist energy, not the auditor energy.
Very different.
Compliance energy. The other thing that came to my mind is Fritjof Capra's pretty brand new, I think he calls them life principles. And the first one is his, very well-developed web of life metaphor. The structure is a network, is a web. The second is actually regeneration, which for me was the first time I've heard him use that phrase, but for me, that's the process. So there's the structure of life. Regeneration is the process that explains how life works. But here's the next two are, again, the connection to technology. The next one is life is inherently creative. And then the final one is, which is even more incredible, life is inherently intelligent. And so it seems to me that humanity needs to reconnect with those truths of what life is. And of course, the internet and technology in general is nodal, is decentralized. That's already been rolled out. Isn't it interesting that that's how it rolled out, aligned with how life works?
John, we just gave this keynote where we referenced Fritjof 17 different times, and the core principle was about making a parallel, an equation between the web of life and the World Wide Web,
Yeah.
and how we use this quote by Chief Seattle: "Man does not weave the web, he is but a strand in it. What he does to the web, he does to himself." And we were trying actively to bring that in and to spark a different kind of thinking than a mechanistic thinking, a more expansive way of approaching it.
So, you know, for all of us, I think our challenge is, how do we think about technology as the enabling, you know, technology to execute the metamorphosis that we need to pass through. I think it's super exciting. So I happen to know the answer to the question I'm about to ask, Danielle, but you guys just actually formally launched the Regenerative Technology Project, and maybe share with us. I don't think you've actually told us what the project is. Is it a company? Is it a nonprofit? Is it a research project? What is it? And if you don't know, that's fine too. I launched Capital Institute, and I couldn't answer the question, what was Capital Institute? But then tell us how it went, and where you launched and all that. Share with us your story.
Great. I'll give a little bit on the project itself, and Danielle, I'll pass to you to talk about sustainable brands. So the Regenerative Technology Project, this is the new organization. We intend for it to be a hybrid model that is both have a nonprofit element as well as a commercial element, for-profit element. But ultimately, you know, the goal here is to create a community for this concept to seed and be co-created into the world. If you go into circles in Silicon Valley, you aren't hearing much about regen tech. So where might builders, and where might investors, and where might corporates, and where might accelerators, and all of the different constituencies in the technology ecosystem go if they wanted to learn more about this concept? As I mentioned, we have, if this concept, if this design paradigm is starting to come into all sorts of different industries, which by the way are often underpinned by technologies, what could be a place, a resource hub, a space to learn, there's an education component to this, but also a space to really hackathon and build and trial for regenerative technology. So the way that we are approaching this is a hub, is a community, is a space for education, for content, for research. My background is in research, and obviously there's quite a bit of blue ocean research to do on this concept. Also a space for events, a space for bringing this concept into embodied and lived experiences in events, in workshops, in all sorts of different things. Danielle has brought forth a brilliant idea around how do we bring that artist energy into the world. There's a platform idea there of calling forth folks to submit their ideas in a 3-minute segment of what is your idea for a societal or ecological innovation, and have a technology thread be part of that. So events, education, and content research. And then third, depending on directions of funding and partnerships and so forth, what would it be to actually develop regenerative technologies? We have all kinds of ideas of mycelial technologies or peer-to-peer technologies, mutual aid, gives and asks platforms that could really help change makers, folks in the regenerative movement, folks all over the world actually doing the work, whether they call it regeneration or not, to better connect with one another, to better share resources, to better pool what they're doing and move into, and collectively align within their regions, within their projects, within their sectors. So
the
that's
internet of regeneration.
May it be. But those are kind of the 3 areas that we see for the project: education, research, content, technology itself, and events and experience.
Nice. And I happen to know that you guys formally launched at Sustainable Brands, which I'm really excited to hear about. But I think that's a wonderful it's largely an American platform, so you'll have to figure out your global launch as your next project. But tell us, how was this received? You had a keynote, main stage, and then did you have a workshop, or what was the follow-up to that?
Yeah, so this was our first keynote that we did together.
Danielle, you seem to be muted. although you don't look muted, but we're not hearing
Can you
you.
hear me?
I hear.
Yeah, now we do.
I hear.
Okay. I often have trouble with that. So this was the first keynote that we gave together in the launch of our project with the intent to get the concept out, and then today to launch the white paper, which you're all welcome to download off our website. We would love it if anyone would read it, much less all of you. But why sustainable brands? A few reasons. When Jessica and I first came together, I was so skeptical and I wasn't a part of the project. I was just wondering, like, what is this and why is she doing it? And like, how on earth does this exist in a reality-based framework, especially if we don't have like carbon regenerative or carbon neutral data centers? And what I learned just from engaging with Jessica was that that's a very mechanistic viewpoint. And that was the viewpoint I was coming from. Right? But there's multiple layers to this concept. And all of Jessica's years of research have evolved into this framework called the regenerative tech stack, which incorporates this layer of the actual tech stack, which needs a lot of improvement in the actual world as far as getting to net zero or something carbon regenerative. But the layers above and below frame the whole system, meaning an ecological approach to technology that isn't linear and mechanistically just looking at the physical software tech stack. So I watched as my behavior changed around this concept, and I went from kind of pouty face to what if, which actually physically feels better. It takes 64 muscles in the face to frown, but only 17 to smile. I don't think that's a
Is that right?
It is true. Google it. And
Must be true.
yeah, or I'm saying it here today and I'm sticking with it. And I started to kind of convert myself in thinking, what would this look like? What if? And so we brought that into sustainable brands, not trying to do something very on the nose as far as this is a business solution, this is ESG, this is not ESG, but what does this holistic framework look like? And what could it be if technology truly inspired us? And if we had not a fatalistic view of the future, but a more optimistic view of the future, even if those technologies do not exist today. Because my thinking now, and after working with Jessica for well over a year, is that the conversation is part of the process. And the conversation is going to lead to different kinds of thinking, different kind of big, beautiful brains coming into the room and sharing ideas. And then the colliding atoms just create new opportunities and new elements in the ecosystem where we can develop and evolve and adapt together. So that is why when we first met up, I was like, you know what, if this was my project, I would launch it Sustainable Brands, because it would be the most effective way of reaching the biggest brands in the world. And if these companies don't start to evolve and shift their relationship to tech, then how will we start to see that shift? So we really were intentional around where we wanted to place this first concept, and also to be humble about the fact that we don't know. You know, we are raising, we're not coming with all the answers. We're living these questions and hoping that as a collective community, we will make this shift together.
And how were you received?
Oh,
Very well.
yeah, that went well. Yeah.
Yeah, we were
Got
really
the big
lucky.
hug?
Whenever you have a talk, it's always nice to have it on the first day of a conference. We were really lucky that we had it on the first evening. So we had a wonderful time slot, which allowed us to present this to, it was an audience of about 850 people. So it was fantastic. Wow. And therefore, the rest of the week, we had folks, you know, coming up to us and being in conversation about the topic. And it was amazing to walk the expo floor and see all of these climate tech technologies that are suddenly asking, well, how would we incorporate regeneration into our ESG analytics platform, into our carbon credits, whatever, which again, in and of itself,
Who knows?
It's a notable question.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, you know, there were folks, there were corporates and brands there. There were, you know, some investment types and accelerator types. There were plenty of technology vendors in the room. And it was amazing. It was a fantastic splash. I think, Danielle, we've already been invited back. So really exciting to have that be threaded into the conversation of sustainable this year.
I'm not at all surprised. I suspect the ripples from that will only build. So that's really exciting to hear. I noticed in the chat, someone raised the question about, and I'm going to now switch topics here for a second. And before we get to the tech stack, which I know we're dying to talk about, I am curious, there's this thing out there which has a big head of steam called generative AI. And there are actually people, when I began talking about regenerative economics, talking about a generative economy. And so how do we hold this with next to, apart from generative AI, or is that just a coincidence in words that are almost the same, but they're not the same?
They're not the same.
Okay.
Generative AI, of course, being a reference to the type of model that has come through in recent innovations in deep learning. GPTs, as in ChatGPT, generative pre-train, what is it? Generative, somebody help me out. Generative pre-trained transformer models that are a type of machine learning or deep learning technology. Regenerative being a different definition that I think most of us on the call here are familiar with. A question, though, of, well, what about regenerative AI is one that I've been exploring, and I know a handful of folks on the call are also exploring as well. Calling out to you, Grant, who's really been working on this, Kieran. But, this question of how might we use generative AI technologies to support regenerative decision-making, to support regenerative design, to support regenerative communities, this is starting to take shape. Honestly, I have not found a kind of single great example of a Gen AI startup that is doing this beyond really knowledge sharing. I think Kieran, with Grant on the call here, is probably the best that I've seen. Incredible work that they're doing. But in terms of, there are a few out there that are trying to poke around at, well, how might we use generative AI for biomimetic design? Or how might we use generative AI to better understand soil health across, hundreds of different bioregions? But they're very early. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room when we talk about generative AI, which is the energy consumption, the water consumption, the amount of computation that these very large language models take for even trivial things like a search. I think it's estimated at 100x what a search used to cost, or a general kind of basic search.
And now we don't even have the option to use the AI when we do a search. It just happens automatically.
There is a Jevons paradox happening in generative AI right now, for sure. As in, a breakthrough in energy doesn't reduce the amount of energy, it increases the amount of consumption because it reduces the cost. Except we're not internalizing the real costs of generative AI.
One of the interesting insights I gained on this trip I'm on is there's someone here who's deeply involved in carbon credit projects, creating the projects. And she said pretty much if she needs to sell carbon credits, there's an unlimited bid for them because of the huge uptick that the big tech companies have in needing to meet their now higher energy current consumption and future consumption expectations. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. But I mean, the consequences of this are rapidly spinning out. And maybe, Grant, since you're here, anything to add on this generative AI versus regenerative AI? Just for people who are not familiar, Grant has started an AI company, but has, in my opinion, brilliantly carved out a niche to actually develop regenerative AI agents as opposed to reductionist AI agents, which are going to be 99.9% of the AI computation happening, because that's what 99% of the quote knowledge that sits out on the internet is. So maybe just jump in quick, Grant, if you had anything to add on that.
Sure, yeah. Just how I think about it, the word generative is to create and to create, something out of raw materials, and, generative AI does a great job of that. Regenerative, in my mind, is the full life cycle. So it's not just generation, but it's like, how do we think about artificial intelligence and the technology startup and the tech stack that's on it, and all of the constituents and ecosystem in which it operates, holistically. So in my mind, that's sort of the distinction between generative and regenerative. For us, we focus on kind of an augmented intelligence, where we're making sure that the human and the human operator, we don't call them users, the human operator and the AI have a right relationship. And that relationship involves the human, including their knowledge, and creating a kind of a curated knowledge base that the AI can use in its generation, in its generative abilities, which reduces power consumption and the amount of context that the AI has to generate on the fly itself, because it can use a lot of context from the human's knowledge base. So that's just a quick snapshot, quick example.
Good. Thanks, Grant.
John, I just want to follow up on something you said, because it pulls at my heartstrings and it gets me so agitated. I often need to go for a beach walk, which is the statistics around how profoundly energetically extractive our new AI is. Every major tech company has rescinded their climate pledges over this period of the last few years. And we
Have they publicly?
Yes, Google and Microsoft, because of the white paper that we just published, we had to really deep dive into those statistics, and they're not only harrowing and shocking, but I'm discovering that most old school, deep sustainability folks aren't even aware of this, because there's also there's a clash among people who are quite resistant to technology. And I'll be honest with you, I was one of them. When I went to my radical environmental studies college, I was like the only one that wasn't on financial aid and had a laptop, which was like blasphemous back then. And I wouldn't touch it because it was technology, and we wanted to compost and make our own shoes and whatever. But my mom installed a underwater dolphin screensaver for me, just so that I would be more inclined to be accepting of the technology. So I think there's also a cultural shift that needs to happen in recognizing technology is everywhere. So either we change our relationship to it, or this slow train is not so slow anymore, and it's entering into all of our worlds, because frankly, we haven't had full integration into AI yet. So we're already at this stage where the largest technology companies are rescinding their climate pledges. These data centers are often using more water or energy than entire countries, which is shocking, right? Yeah. And most recently, Microsoft announced that they're trying to get clearance so that they can launch their next data center on 3 Mile Island. And if anyone on the call are old school susty folks like me, old school greenies, I mean, that's the 3 Mile Island was yeah, thank you. Exactly. It was the site of the environmental atrocity that led Rachel Carson to write her book on Silent Spring, that frankly introduced most people to the world of environmentalism to begin with. Like, you literally can't write this bleep. And here we are now. So somehow we're going to have to face the oncoming storm and
yeah, and the thing, my take on that is, our society, human civilization somehow, I'm not expressing an opinion on whether reopening 3 Mile Island is a good or bad idea for humanity and for life on its planet. But if it is a good idea because we've decided it's okay to do it, why did it take us, Microsoft, wanting to, create AI rather than a solution to destroying life on this planet to get us to open up 3 Mile Island? I mean, it's just insane. And my answer to my question is, it's because of the finance algorithm, which is really the operating system that's driving our collective decision-making.
Yeah.
And Colin, I see you've got your hand up. I'm going to ask you to be a little patient, because I've got another topic I want to get to. And if we start going down other questions, we may not get to it. And this is like the cool question here, which is, tell us what a tech stack is, for those of us who are not super techie, myself included. And then if you can, share with us your vision of a regenerative tech stack, and feel free to share a visual if you think that will help us.
Great. So traditionally, a tech stack is something that is used by businesses and builders to look to get a kind of map of what are the hardware and software and network configuration and the components that go into a technology application. It's a designscape, it's a blueprint, if you like, of what a technology is made of. And that has been more or less what technologists focus on, the tech stack. But it's an applied design question. So
in the olden days, it was hardware, middleware, software.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
So in this inquiry of, well, how might we even hold these concepts of regenerative design, of the ways in which that is something that begins with the person and the intention, and then is translated into the world, and then is in the world and has relationships. Technology has relationships with the world that the designer can't control. How would we hold sort of that whole reality, the complexity that our technologies are embedded in everything else? And so what emerged out of this inquiry was kind of taking hold of this existing framework of a tech stack and attempting to ask, well, what would a regenerative tech stack actually include? So I'm gonna pop open this image here. Hopefully you can see this. Okay, can you see my screen? Give me a thumbs up. All right, cool. All right, it's overwhelming, but let me talk you through it. So whereas
nice and simple.
whereas today tech looks only at layer 2, the designs, the applications, that bottom darker line is again the hardware, software, operations, security, the hard deep tech stuff. On top of that would be the applications, the use cases, if you like. With a regenerative tech stack, we need to go deeper. We need to ask first, well, what are the intentions? What are the value systems? What are the
Jessica, can I slow you down for a little quick second? Help us, because it's hard to read this, at least on my computer. Talk a little bit more about what normal is in layer 2.
Okay.
Just so we get grounded.
Yes. Normally I have animation on this slide, but I decided to completely overwhelm all of you. So layer 2 here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, is typically where tech focuses. There is no layer 3 or layer 1, but it is looking at, really, a typical tech stack is just this dark green band here. Often, or sometimes, there is a question of, well, what are the applications that sit on top of the hardware and software and middleware? And so that's this layer here. When we're talking about regeneration, these are a handful. There are many. We're tracking over 30 different categories of this, but here are some. How technology is supportive of ecosystem remediation, how technology is supporting circular economy, how it is helping aggregate sustainable industrial feedstock, etc. So these are the use cases or the applications. But we call this in the regenerative tech stack layer 2 because that's actually not where we start the design process. In this work, it's the I, we, it on some level, right? This begins with the question of, why are we building in the first place? Not what we're building, but why are we doing it? I keep asking this question, what has digital transformation been in service to? And so layer 1 on a regenerative tech stack is asking, what is it that our technology is envisioning? What are the principles that we are designing and building around? How does technology reflect our worldviews? And of course, this is the foundation for our business models, for the governance models that we select, for how we finance our technologies and how that influences the trajectory of technologies. If this feels abstract, talk to a tech startup entrepreneur, and you will almost always hear a story in which they had a vision, they had an idea, but because of the VC model that they had to develop and generate returns for, they had to pivot that idea. They had to pivot that idea because the business model had to reflect the financing model. So layer 1 is really that first question. Why are we doing this? And what are the intentions, the values, the principles that go into these tangible tools?
Yeah.
Now, as I spoke to layer 2.
That's beautiful. We with my colleagues at In Rhythm, we start with a very simple statement, which is, what are our shared beliefs?
Yeah.
Yep.
Same thing.
Layer two, as I was speaking to a little bit already, is these use cases. How might we use technology to support regenerative outcomes? And I'll just pick on localization here for a second. We know that technology is a tool of scale. We have technology platforms that are currently serving over 1 billion people today. Huge scale, huge globalized scale, but it is also a tool of localization. We can see examples of technologies supporting, bioregional community and collaboration, coordination across people in an area that are trying to coordinate together, but otherwise wouldn't trust each other, or they wouldn't know each other, or they wouldn't have a kind of common sense of what they're even working towards. So there's a really interesting way in which technologies can help localize. And we think that particularly when there's a regenerative, initiative around this, that this can really serve that. Then there's layer three, this recognition that we shape our tools shape us. In other words, when we put a technology into the world, it is going to influence our systems. I think about this layer three of systems and relationships as the ecology of technology. That technology is constantly in relationship with everything else. We can't separate it out. And again, if this sounds abstract, we can probably think of examples in which technologies or algorithms have influenced political conversations that we've had, have influenced how we understand what's going on in the news, have influenced how we relate to our family. What are our kids up to right now? How do we punish our kids? So many folks tell me we just take away their devices, right? So this question of how is technology both influencing our systems, our political systems, our economic systems, our work systems, employment, right? Our cultural, our family systems, but is also influenced by how the environment is influencing supply chains for rare earth minerals that go into all of these new technologies. So this systemic question is also part of the regenerative tech stack. We have to bring in this constant interdependence, this constant interrelationship of technology with all of these systems in which we are all embedded. So there you have this overwhelming graphic, the regenerative tech stack.
I love it. It's brilliant. And I know you've been studying and working with Nora Bateson pretty deeply for a while now, and I'm loving how you've woven I love the ecology of technology. I think that for anyone who's in the current cohort, they all just experienced Nora this week, yesterday. So hopefully that connects some dots. But for those who have not, Nora Bateson's work is very much reflected in that layer three, the trans-contextual interconnectivity, relationality of everything. And it's like she says, where does the forest end? In another way of saying, where does this phone end?
That's right.
It's
Where's the end of the phone?
Yeah, the same question.
John, this is also why I find so fascinating that you mentioned earlier about Fritjof Capra and the web of life, because one of the early carrots for me in even being interested in technology is that the World Wide Web is in many ways a mirror or a parallel of the ecosystem. It is infinite. Everything is interconnected. You pull one strand, you impact everything else. And I actually don't think that's by accident. I think it's this beautiful, incredible parable. And there's so much possibility that lies in that, where our hearts and minds oriented not toward greed and toward health and restoration and renewal. We're just not there yet. Yet.
Yeah, and I can't multitask, but it's a Greek name, so it's tricky to remember. But boy, I literally just this afternoon stood at a statue of this Greek man whose name I can't remember, who worked with Berners-Lee to create the internet. And Al Gore came here, I don't know, a few years ago to celebrate his life after he passed away. This man came from this small Greek island, who, we're here to talk about how to create a regenerative economy on this small Greek island and how to think about that you know, what are the patterns that can be replicated in any place and in any organization. So it's really fun to be experiencing this today. I think that was a great sort of summary of the tech stack, and I really I think you've done an incredible job of integrating you know, the whole concept of the regenerative paradigm, and the top layer is the one that, you know, I had no idea about until I read your paper, and it's brilliant. It's really brilliant work. I think I'm not just saying this. I think this is going to be extremely profound. I don't have any idea how we're going to cause the tech industry to behave in accordance with this, any more than I have any idea how we're going to get the finance industry, speaking of tech, to behave in accordance with this. But just laying out the vision is absolutely the first starting point. And so I really want to commend you and cheer you and champion what you're doing.